Welcome to Regulate This, a really unfiltered podcast. We're here with a whole new episode of Regulate This, and I'm super excited because we're talking about something that I know is giving a lot of CCOs, and let's be real, advisors headaches, and that's off-channel chaos, or should I say off-channel communications.
Now, wait a minute, Leila. Everybody says they don't do that. So I know nobody is upset about that because nobody does it.
You're right. Nobody texts. Nobody's using messaging apps. Like, that's so 1999.
But, you know, occasionally they might send one or two, but that doesn't matter, right?
No, all their clients are old. They don't know how to use cell phones or text messages.
Well, I hear that a lot, that, well, it doesn't matter if I just do it every now and then. It's not something I regularly do, and we claim we don't do it at all. So it doesn't really matter if it's just the occasional time, right?
Wrong.
Dun, dun, dun. You're kidding.
Listen, I mean, text messaging is so rampant. Like, if I open my phone right now, and I'm opening it right now, I'm putting in my pattern, right, so that I can unlock my phone and make sure it's secure if I ever lose it. I have currently 319 unread messages. Do you know why? Because we used to get spam through snail mail, right?
Right.
Then we got spam through email, which we're still getting spam through email. Now we're fucking getting spam through text messages. 319 unread email messages. I can't even keep up with the people I actually want to talk to because I'm sitting here sorting through. My car warranty has expired. I am sorting through.
But you better get on that. They won't call you again.
Well, I'm also supposed to sign up for Medicare, apparently. And if you're a Georgia resident, you know how this feels. But I keep getting people who call and just sit there and...
I'm realizing that maybe there's some times that this has happened. What do I do?
Text messaging has become so common and so mainstream and is used across demographic, across age group. The expectation now is that firms are utilizing technology to archive those text messages and supervise them. We went through this with emails, right? Remember when emails came out? And I don't know about your state bar, Tracy, but my state bar, they're sitting here like talking about how it's not secure and no one's gonna email. Well, we all live and die by email inboxes nowadays. Text messaging is basically just another iteration of email. So it's become so commonly used and so widely used. You have to have technology, just like you do for your emails where you're archiving it, you've got search terms, you're doing your sampling, you're reviewing your emails. You have to do the same for text messaging. And I don't care if it's 5 a month or 5,000 a month. You've got to have a solution in place to archive it because it's part of your firm's books and records, and then supervise it.
So what responsibility do I have for all of those advisors that are out there that are under my umbrella?
You've got to make sure they're complying with your rules and regulations.
But what if I said we don't do that? Because historically we never did, kind of like you talked about the Bar Association. Historically, before email was a big thing, people didn't use it. And then one day it became a thing. And everybody started using it, and there were still those people that were kind of old school and kind of had that archaic thinking that said, this is never going to be a hit. People are never going to do this because it's not secure. There's no way that we can harness this and make sure that, you know, there's a way to incorporate this and keep our clients safe. Of course, we found that wasn't true, but now with the cell phone and it's so portable and so mobile, I think there's that fear again. Because back then, computers were plugged into your wall and you had the dial-up, right?
You've got mail.
Exactly. Now it's kind of a joke because our laptops can go with us in a variety of places, and some computers are small enough to fit in our hands. Heck, our cell phones are so small that, they're mini computers now and they're so smart. So how do we manipulate that with the use of the cell phone when we have these advisors that are all over the United States sometimes? Because firms are growing through mergers and acquisitions. A firm here today is gone tomorrow, and now it's been absorbed by somebody else.
Right, right. So, I mean, listen, there's a lot of challenges, right? It's not enough to say we don't allow text messaging, because you do. If you're using any sort of calendaring app, if you're using any sort of application that automates anything in your business, it's likely set up to send some sort of text message reminder, right? It's set up to send something with a link or a thank you or whatever through text message. It is inevitable that you are going to have a client who reaches out to you and text messages you and asks you questions. And for many advisors, their friends, their family members, their neighbors, the parents of their children, they all become clients. Right? So these are people who had your cell phone. But when we look at historically how financial advisors have worked, historically they've always given their personal telephone number. So now we've entered this age where you can text message. You know, we're basically carrying little computers around in our pockets. So it's not enough to say anymore that we prohibit the use of text messages because someone is using it. So that's not enough anymore. So you have to utilize some sort of archiving tool for text messages. Here's the rub.
I knew there was going to be something.
Yep, some chafing for sure. Lots of rubbish happening. The problem is because historically advisors have used their own personal telephone numbers, their personal devices. You now have all these clients who've been taught, let me call my advisor's cell phone. Well, now you're asking these advisors who've been using these same telephone numbers for 10, 20, 30 years, who are using their personal cell phones, their personal devices to communicate with clients, you're asking them for access to that phone to archive these communications. You run into privacy issues. You run into, whether the technology that they have set up on their phone allows you to go in and remotely archive and supervise that text messaging. So then you're asking, all these advisors to change the way they've been conducting business, which, let me tell you, it's a ton of bitching and moaning that happens. Right? Well, I've been doing it this way for 30 years. This advisor had, these clients have had this telephone number forever. Because one of the challenges with the technology that's available is that it requires you to log into an application or tool that gives you a new telephone number. So now we're having to retrain these clients to start contacting a new telephone number.
So a bitch, moan, and whine session. I get it. I wonder, though, what happens to those folks that use those platforms that can be loaded onto your phone, and perhaps, you're supposed to use your email from there, and you're supposed to be able to call out from that, the voice over internet platform, the VoIP, or you're supposed to be able to text from that, and then they make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's inevitable that there's going to be a human error at some point where something happens and you're out of the office, or you're in a situation where you're trying to do something quickly, and I can already see where I'm going to do it and I accidentally use my personal side of the phone instead of the VoIP.
It's absolutely going to happen. I mean, that's a risk of allowing text messaging. That's a risk of having a separate app that you have to log into, that you have to utilize to send and receive text messages. And listen, we hear from advisors all the time, these tools aren't perfect. I'm not getting notifications all the time. It's not always sending or receiving the messages. So I get it. There's some challenges with some of these tools. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is if you're utilizing your personal cell phone, your personal device for business purposes, if you're ever involved with a client complaint, any sort of litigation or arbitration associated with your business as a financial advisor, because you're utilizing that personal device for business purposes, you're opening that device up to be subpoenaed. Yeah.
So does that mean all of those things that I have on my phone could be exposed?
understand that legally your phone can be subpoenaed. So best practice would be to use a separate device for business purposes and assume that that device, there's no expectation of privacy with it. And there are vendors out there like Verizon who have a business account that you can utilize that actually allows you to archive those text messages. So, what I tell people is there's a lot more technology geared towards financial services these days than there were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But that doesn't mean there aren't other tools that are industry agnostic, that aren't adequate or couldn't meet the regulatory standard for archiving and supervising text messages. So go do your due diligence, go find a solution, and I don't give a shit how much it costs, because I can tell you these firms that are being fined, they're being fined millions of dollars for failing to archive these text messages and failing to supervise. And some of the recent deficiencies related to off-channel communications, sometimes it's the ownership, it's the executive team. They're messaging each other on their phones about internal business issues. If it's related to the business, then it has to be part of the firm's books and records. If you're having communications with your partner, with your executive team, with advisors, internally about internal business issues, that's still required to be archived. What's the difference of doing that over text message or email? Your email gets archived. Why wouldn't your text message?
I think it's so interesting too. I know we've had different times where we've been on site visits or we've had meetings with clients and they've told us vehemently that I do not do this. Our firm does not do this. We hold our ground on this. We do not allow this. And then somebody will let out a peep in a meeting and say, well, does this count?
Yep.
And then lo and behold, we find out that they do it. And nobody has been archiving. And that can be a problem, right? And so, it's one of those things that I think people don't realize that it isn't just the big, bold things like I'm, texting about certain communications with somebody's investments. It can be even the little minute things that you're talking about within the firm. It's any of those communications that are business-based. And so, when the firm thinks about it, sometimes they're thinking about the fact that we're not corresponding with clients that way. And so we don't do that. And we're correct because we don't do that. But they're not thinking about, but I am texting with my colleagues, or I am texting with my leadership team, or I am sitting in this meeting and I'm shooting a text under the table to the person across the table from me. I don't know how many times that's happened to me, but many. And if that's the case, you are still doing this. So realize as much as you protest, you're actually doing the very things that you're saying, and you're stamping, the table with your fist saying, we don't do it. Yes, you do.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, at the end of the day, there are always going to be errors, right? Where there is a human present, there is going to be a human error that happens. And the expectation is that whoever, sent the text message incorrectly, so let's say through the wrong tool or application, the expectation is they're notifying their CCO or the appropriate compliance person. They're forwarding that message to an already archived platform. So forwarding your text through the email that's being archived. And then letting your CCO know so they can review it. Right? Because they also have to keep track of these, we call them compliance exceptions, right? Where there's been violations of the firm's internal policies and procedures. You were supposed to text through this app, you didn't, you did it through your phone's native SMS application. Well, that's an exception. You technically violated the policy and procedure, but it's something as a CCO, if it keeps coming up over and over and over again, and it keeps coming up with the same people, it's like, are you really making a mistake? Or do you keep getting caught inappropriately sending messages through an unarchived methodology? Because then when you're seeing those trends, that escalates that problem, right? That escalates that person, so they should be receiving more stringent repercussions as a result, up to and including termination.
Well, at what point do you review it and say, maybe we need to change our policy.
Let's be real, and I mean like real honest. A lot of you know if your advisors are text messaging when they're not supposed to. And if you know and you don't do anything, it's a problem. So most people know, and if you don't know or you think it's not, assume it is. If any of you keep up with the SEC actually has different trainings they do with the public that are free to attend. And more recently, in 2024, they talked about text messaging. And that's where it came up that it's not enough to prohibit text messaging. There has to be an assumption that people are text messaging and you have a solution in place. So you have to assume that's happening. And then you've got to implement solutions no matter how big of a headache it may be, no matter how much bitching and moaning you may hear, you have to implement these solutions.
Right, because even folks that implemented things or folks that turn themselves in, I should say, some of those folks still got penalized.
They did.
And so, the thought is so many times it's, well, maybe if I go and I throw out my hat in the ring and say, yes, I've done it, I've been a bad actor, or I fall on my sword, they'll give me a break. And people are realizing that this is something that's happening so widespread that they're trying to show people, like, we know this is happening. You know it's happening. It's happening across the board with almost every organization, and we're making a point of this, and we're going to hold people accountable so people start taking this seriously, and you realize that we think that this is a big deal. And because of that, they have actually given fines to folks that have turned themselves in, as well as people that were caught with their hand in the cookie jar that didn't cop to it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, those firms that self-reported did receive lower fines. And if you look at the violation, like there were some violations and enforcement actions related to failing to file 13Fs, for example. There was an example of a firm that self-reported and was not fined at all. Right. So self-reporting does mitigate. It does reduce your potential fine that you would receive. So it's a good thing to self-report. But, keeping in mind, this is, again, another area where it's in our industry, you can't ask for forgiveness first and permission later. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you can ask for forgiveness. It's going to come with a couple $1 million bill.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, what's it worth it to you? Is the bitching and moaning and the operational infrastructure you have to put in place to deal with text messaging and being able to archive and supervise those text messages, what is the value of that? Is it worth a $3 million fine?
Right, and you're right. It does often reduce it, or helps if you do self-report. But the best cause of action, the best practice, is to say, hey, we know that this is likely happening. We're actually going to do something about it. They're always going to, or at least usually going to, give you a better chance if you cop to it and admit that you're doing something. But if you actually take action and you show that you're trying to resolve it and you're putting something in place so that it doesn't happen moving forward, you have a much greater chance of not having those big fines and those types of things, and not spurring additional causes of action. So, do the right things. If you know you're doing it, don't play the odds and say, maybe I can get away with it for a little while longer and then I can self-report. Don't play the odds. Don't play the game. Don't gamble with your company. It's not worth it. You are investing other people's hard-earned money. This isn't a time to gamble. This isn't a time to play the odds. This isn't a time to not take things seriously. When people do that, that's often when they get burnt. And not only is it something that can cost you money, it costs you your reputation. It's embarrassing. It's something that's out there that anytime a new client Googles you, they're going to find out who you are, and it may prevent you from getting additional business and opportunities.
So Tracy, I remember a time when there was payphones.
Oh, those were the days.
And to make a call, the payphone was $0.25.
Yes.
I also remember a time when gas was under $1 a gallon.
I remember those times. It seems like so long ago.
I also walked to school and back home in 10 feet of snow.
Uphill both ways.
Uphill both ways.
It was a troubling time.
It was. And I say this because a lot of advisors are like resistant to this idea of I've got to spend more time, more resources. Frankly, I got to spend more money putting in place solutions. Listen, it's a whole new world. The technology we have today didn't exist 40, 50 years ago, right? People didn't text message like they do now back when there were payphones and it was $0.25 to make a call, right? They didn't text message the way they do now back when gas was under $1 a gallon.
Right.
Times change. You have to change with it. You can't continue to be resistant to changing times. And you have to understand that you are going to have to invest in your business to comply with these additional rules and regulations. Depending on the source that you go to, the cost of doing business has increased anywhere from 30 to over 60% because of all the regulation, because of all the tools and technology that's available that you have to utilize to make sure you're complying with regulation, that you're making sure that you're able to adequately supervise your staff. So stop bitching and moaning about back in the day when you used to walk to school uphill both ways in 10 feet of snow. I've heard my parents say that. Stop bitching and moaning about when eggs were less than $1 a dozen. That might be a triggering comment. You know what I mean? Like, they're not anymore.
Right. When people couldn't propose with an egg, they would give you a diamond instead. The thing is, though, think about this, too, that back in that period, people would trust you with a handshake.
They would.
The news would be on at certain times, and it was pretty much, the noon hour, the morning, and the evening. It wasn't a 24-hour, a 24/7 news cycle. They couldn't pick up their phone and take it with them and have news at the drop of a hat and not know if it was true, false, or indifferent. There's a lot of information out there, and most people weren't self-investing either. There wasn't the competition that there is today. So in order to get those clients and gain that trust, there are things that you have to put in place where you're proving yourself to the marketplace. And part of that is showing that you're a good actor. So if they're able to Google your name and find all of your deficiencies and find all of the ways that you're not, that's going to be problematic. So spending a little money to make even more money is actually a boon for you. You have to spend money to make money, and if anybody knows that, it should be all of you out there, because as you're having your clients invest, you are transparent with a lot of your fees and telling them what they're paying in order to have you do that for them. You also are having to invest in your business and in the things that you're doing to ensure that you're able to provide those services in a way that's also protecting those clients.
But Tracy, this is cutting into my profit.
Well, if you want to make money, you better do it the right way, and let me tell you, you'll make more.
Well, I think the other thing, too, is our industry, there seems to be like this race to zero. It's like, how low can I go in my fees? And it's like,
Right.
No, the cost of doing business has increased.
Right.
You have increased regulation. You're having to spend more money on resources and people in order to run your business. Why are your fees going the opposite direction? Do you not value yourself?
Right.
Do you not value your business? If eggs are $14 a dozen,
Right.
why can't you reevaluate how you're doing business and ensure not only that you're building in efficiencies, but maybe it is time to increase your fees, because
Right.
that's just the cost of doing business.
Right, and when you're looking at what's the highest and best use of your time, it probably isn't sitting around doing your own compliance and trying to figure this stuff out. It's getting people that actually know the business to help you with that. And when you're talking about your fees to clients, it's easy to have this conversation if they realize what this does for them. Everybody wants to know what's in it for me. And the thing about compliance is it's a protection. It's a protection not only for the business, and it's a huge protection for the business. You are mitigating risk, but it's also a protection for those clients. And they're giving you something that is their life earnings, and many of those people cannot recoup that loss. They can't get it back, and then they will have nothing to leave the next generation or beyond. So realize the compliance that you're doing when you're having those sales conversations, when you're talking about the things you're doing. This is actually a way to have the clients understand the levels in which you're willing to go to put things in place to protect them. And that's how much you care about them and how much you care about your business.
So we're right back to this idea of entrepreneurial responsibility, right?
And maturity.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you're a damn adult. Start acting like it, right? You've got these rules and regs. You're allowing your advisors and your staff to utilize their personal devices. I'm not even going to go down the rabbit hole of how that creates issues if you also have non-solicits and non-competes with your advisors, and then you're allowing them to communicate with your clients with their devices. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole as a whole legal issue with the use of personal devices. But, it's times change. Let's change with them. Let's stop bitching and moaning about how things used to be.
Well, and if you're going to not be a one man or one woman or one person shop, you better have the things in place to be able to monitor and do the right things, because otherwise you better be planning to work 24/7 and have a very tight leash on everybody. And I don't know about you, Leila, but I don't like to micromanage. I've got a lot to do. I've got a lot of shit to do and a limited amount of time. And outside of work, I also have a life. And so...
Oh, you have a life?
I do.
What's that like?
It's amazing. I didn't work this hard to not be able to do things. And so, if I'm going to live and I'm going to enjoy my work, I'm going to have the flexibility and freedom to thrive and to strive to get ahead. And the only way I can do that is to have other people doing what they need to do. And I can't do that if I don't have checks and balances in place. So I need to evolve with the times and with the technology. And if I can't do that, then I better live in the Stone Ages. And if I'm going to do that, my business isn't going to grow. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to evolve, and my client base is going to stay small. So I better plan to have a smaller home. My kids better not be wanting to do as much, and my vacations better be pretty small as well. So my life changes, in a way that really isn't what a business owner wants.
Right.
I'm basically an employee again.
Oh, Lord, that sucks.
Who wants that? Who wants the risk and the responsibility and none of the reward?
Yeah, I suck as an employee. I run my mouth too much.
Exactly. So don't we all? So if you really are going to do the right things and you think that you want to grow, you want to get ahead, and you want to have a business that evolves, then you better evolve too.
So I think what our listeners should take away is that off-channel communications is a big deal. And it's not just about the archiving and supervising. There are bigger impacts of not following rules and regulations and, being resistant to implementing changes in your business so you can stay compliant. It's a big challenge, I know. There's always going to be resistance to change, but it's the right thing to do. So, on that note, we're going to wrap up our conversation on off-channel communications.
And we'll see you next time on Regulate This.
Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Make sure to check us out on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, good compliance is good business. You're a damn adult. Start acting like it.